You wanted disclosure. I am a whistleblower recently retired from the inside, and you're only getting part of the truth. Hi, so I heard y'all want disclosure? All right, hope you have time for this because there's a lot. Grab a coffee or maybe get comfy with a pillow somewhere. I've been watching the news and hearing a lot of things I know to be true, shockingly being talked about openly by some higher-ups in a documentary, so I figured, what the hell? You can call me Rhea. Not my real name, obviously, but it will do. A little about me. I spent about 8 years in the military to pay for college, and then another decade plus in a part of the U.S. intelligence component that does not officially exist. On paper, I worked for a boring-sounding office in a department most people have never heard of. In reality, it was a compartment inside a compartment where the odd stuff of a certain nature got routed. My actual specialty is electro-optics, lasers, sensors, EO imaging systems, the math and hardware behind how we detect things at a distance, and in some cases, put energy on them. That is what I trained in, what I did most of my serious work on once I was off the deployment treadmill. So when I say I know something about directed energy weapons and weird sensor returns, that's not I heard this from a friend of a friend. That was my day job. Most of my career was boring in the way dangerous jobs are boring. Long days in windowless rooms, Iraq and Afghanistan in the early years, doing the usual mix of SIGINT and human support, phone records, pattern of life workups, building target packets on people who'd never know my name, but might notice a drone overhead later. After I got out of uniform, I slid over to contractor work, then got pulled into the permanent government side. For a long time, my world was very normal. Counterterrorism, sanctions evasion, shady cargo going through weird ports, stuff like that. After that, foreign missile tests and what you have probably seen described publicly as space domain awareness. Basically, watching dots move around the sky and trying to decide whose dots they were and what they were doing. The weird part started when I was detailed to a small interagency working group looking at what was called anomalous aerospace and undersea systems. Translation: things detected and showing up on sensors that did not match any known platform, did not behave like clutter, and did not go away when you changed radar modes or swapped optical systems. I was there because I understood both sides of the equation, the physics of the sensors and the intelligence context. You get taught very quickly to treat anything unexplained as a glitch, a calibration issue, operator error, software artifacts, anything that keeps your world tidy. You get used to hearing weird glitch as a catch-all. Except after a while, you notice some of those glitches kept showing up across different systems, different countries, decades apart. Same behaviors, same basic locations, same signature that never quite fits. At some point, you either admit there is a real pattern or you drive yourself crazy trying not to see it. If you are useful and you start asking the wrong questions for long enough, someone eventually pulls you aside, takes you to a SCIF, takes your phone, has you sign your life away again, and shows you the next layer of the onion. This onion goes so deep, I doubt that even after years of briefings, I've been exposed to anything below a few layers. Even still, most of this is purposely kept off NIPRNJWIX and is done in person. That is where I learned about most of what you're interested in here and what seems to be bubbling to the surface in the news lately. That when I learned about what we call the Council. Yes, aliens, and I suspect you're not likely to see a lot of what I know mentioned, even by some who know it, who have begun speaking out for reasons I'll get into later. I've never met them face to face. Everything I know about them is from briefings, documents, and one secure video session that I honestly wish I had skipped, but it lines up with too many independent data points to just shrug off as somebody's pet theory. The basic story is this: Earth was noticed roughly 2 billion years ago, long before anything walked around on land. Not because we're special, but because we tripped a sensor, or rather life tripped their sensors. You see, the Council is not a single species. It is a collective of several advanced interstellar, maybe even interdimensional civilizations that run long-term surveys of stars and planets, the way we run spy satellites. Huge distributed arrays of instruments working together, watching thousands of star systems at once, for millions of years at a time. Their gear probably makes the James Webb Telescope look like a kid's backyard telescope. About 2 billion years ago, those instruments picked up biosignatures here, chemical fingerprints in the atmosphere that meant something was alive here. Atmospheric composition like free oxygen and methane, spectral fingerprints, chemical disequilibria that scream, there's metabolism happening down there. You know, the basics. At that point, Earth went into a database as interesting, revisit later. Standard procedure for them when a world looks promising is pretty boring from their point of view. They send automated probes, not big crude ships like you see in sci-fi movies, just small, tough, very smart machines. Those probes come in, mostly target the oceans, and set up self-replicating facilities on the seafloor. Those facilities use local materials to build more facilities, more probes, craft that can operate underwater, in the air, in near space, and eventually avatars that can interact with whatever life evolves. These biological, or rather biomechanical avatars are what some people who claim to have been abducted have likely experienced. Though they do have what we would call ASI, these beings are not gods, they are technology and they aren't perfect. They make mistakes, glitch out, etc. The reason they base all of that underwater for a simple reason. The bottom of an ocean does not care about ice ages, political empires, climate swings, or wars. Temperatures and pressures change slowly over what long periods of time. It's a fairly stable environment, and for much of human history has been mostly inaccessible. Speaking of time, we Earth humans tend to think in terms of nothing longer than the current human lifespan. And when pondering non-human intelligence, we like to think in terms of deep space, distance, and light years, but we seldom consider the lifespan and concept of time for a post-biological species could be quite different than ODS. Only our most astute thinkers in the realms of geology, paleontology, and cosmology think in terms of millions or billions of years, geologic epochs, cosmological history. That is child's play for the Council, which has a different concept of time, more concerned with deep time, millions of years at a stretch. As such, their infrastructure is designed for that. So yes, a lot of the TMOS, transmedium objects, and impossible accelerations you have heard about are just their hardware doing its job. Maintenance, observation, sampling, nothing heroic. The warp bubble/Alcubierre effect was probably mastered by them before our solar system even existed. It's old tech for them. Kinda like the wheel is for us. Also, no, we are not the center of anyone's universe. There are about 1 billion planets in our galaxy that are more or less like Earth. Some just have microbes. Some have more complex life. A smaller subset of those have, or once had, civilizations. We are just one more entry, a fairly recent one in cosmological terms, in a very large survey. Once early humans started doing interesting things, we moved from planet with life to planet with potential. They have watched this same story unfold in slightly different ways around 1,000 times from what I understand. Chemistry leads to biology, biology creates technology. Tool use, language, agriculture, cities, industry, energy, space travel. Somewhere in there you always hit the same fork. Either the species figures out how not to blow itself to pieces with the energy densities it increasingly has access to, such as nuclear fission, nuclear fusion, antimatter, and more exotic matter energy, or it wipes itself out. Our situation worried them. We are a little paradox, extremely good at cooperation and also extremely good at organized violence. Our aggression stood out. Cooperation plus violence isn't unique, but we're very, very good at both. And once you get to things like nuclear power, that combo tends to end very badly. They'd seen plenty of variations of that play out over at least a few billion years. About 10,000 years ago, our trajectory towards that became clear, and there was a major argument inside the Council about what, if anything, to do with us. One side said the odds favored self-destruction once we discovered and weaponized atomic-level technologies. The other side argued we were worth saving, or at least worth understanding better. The compromise was an experiment, one which has ramifications as to why all of this has been hidden for so long. Roughly 65,000 humans were removed from Earth and relocated to what is basically a preserve on a planet around the star you know as 82 Eridani. Internally, we called those people Arids. That star is in our catalogs if you feel like looking it up, but the details of the target planet are not public for obvious reasons. The Arids were started in a kind of controlled paradise. Their world has large dispenser systems that can produce whatever basic material needs they have. Food, clothing, tools, building materials, entire structures for habitation. Think Star Trek replicators scaled up and wired into the environment. In that setup, nobody starves. Nobody is homeless in the way we understand it. Nobody spends their life chasing money just to meet needs. This was just the Arids' natural reality. The point from the Council's view was to remove material scarcity from the equation and see what humans do and achieve when they are not spending most of their energy bashing each other over the head over resources. Meanwhile, the rest of us stayed here on the control planet, dealing with scarcity, ownership, money, hoarding, and the rise of socio-political systems based on scarcity. All of the things that define Earth's civilization. The result, according to what we were briefed, is that the Arids are now around 5,000 years ahead of us technologically, averaged out. Same species, same basic biology, same starting point, completely different trajectory because of conditions. Nature versus nurture on a cosmic scale. For most of their history, the Arids thought they were native to that world. They only found out the truth roughly a century ago in our time. They learned that they were uplifted, that their ancestors were taken from Earth, that they have cousins here. Once they knew that, some of them started coming back to visit the original branch. This is where their history intersects some of the UFO stories you know. The aliens that look almost exactly human are just that, human. They are not hybrids, not clones, not secretly angels or demons. They are Arids, born around another star, showing up here after being given a 10,000-year head start. They have in some cases met with leaders of certain countries and at least 2 UN Secretary Generals, both deceased. Now we get to why this has been buried for 80-some years. You have to think like a senior US official in the 1940s and 1950s. World War II has just ended. The Cold War is starting. Everything is viewed through capitalism versus communism. Then someone puts a briefing in front of you that says, in essence, there is a group of humans living on another world who have no money, no private ownership in the way we structure it, automatic systems that meet their basic needs, and in that environment, they advance thousands of years faster than we have. The men who built what we now call the legacy program in the US that sounded less like interesting anthropological data and more like a walking, talking advertisement for space communism. It looked like proof that communism works better than the system they were trying to defend. That and the ramifications of what could happen if that ever got out terrified them more than the existence of aliens did. Though, to be fair, they plenty had their worldview rocked by the latter too. So the core of the cover-up has never just been aliens or even their technologies. It has been the systemic implications. The idea that scarcity and ownership are not hard-coded into reality, that they are one possible way to run a society, and maybe not the optimal one. That was seen as an existential political threat in the 1940s and 1950s, and some of the people who grew up in that mindset are still steering parts of the program today. Now add in the famous crash retrieval incidents. Roswell 47, Kecksburg 65, a handful of other retrievals around the US and around the world. What we were told is that most of those were not accidents. They were tests and gifts. The Council, with Arid input, allowed certain craft and systems to fall into human hands in a controlled way. Enough intact technology that a very motivated and capable society could learn from it. Not enough that it would instantly rewrite everything. In fact, the Kecksburg landing, it wasn't called a crash internally, was a direct result of a meeting and gift agreement made at Holloman AFB the year prior. The idea was to see who did what with it, who could figure it out, who kept it secret, who tried to share, who tried to weaponize it, who panicked. Based on those results, the plan was to pick one primary human partner to act as the main interface for full Council contact and to begin a managed process of reunifying Earth humans with the Arids and introducing us to the wider community. You can argue whether that is a good way to do it. I am just telling you that is the framework I saw laid out. In the 1980s to 90s, during a brief period when the Cold War ended, there was a push to finally disclose much of this. This was initially proposed at a meeting between then U.S. President Ronald Reagan and then Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev at a summit in Reykjavik, Iceland in 1986. Also discussed was getting rid of nuclear weapons, as had been urged by the Council. In the end, it was decided to wait. There were two more U.S. pushes for disclosure between then and the 2017 New York Times article. One during the Clinton administration and another during the transition between the Obama and first Trump presidency. Now, for the part that put a clock on all of this stuff you've been hearing about 2027, etc. About 3 years ago, a species that is hostile to the Council found out about the Earth Project. They are not part of the collective. They resent the way the Council handles in younger civilizations, as they themselves felt victimized by the Council. They also resent the credit the Council gets for successful cases. I have heard them described as the jealous neighbors who would rather break your toys than watch you win. Yes, we sometimes joke about this stuff because, again, it's the only way to stay sane with this everyday knowledge and integrate it into your civilian life of Thanksgiving dinner, Xmas shopping, taking the kids to soccer practice, etc. Just as an aside, ever consider how two of the biggest holidays of the year involve gluttony, Thanksgiving, and overconsumption, Black Friday? When you have the knowledge many have within the program, stuff that is taken for granted seems really weird and a symptom of the now forced scarcity of our current system. Anyway, back to the aliens. The hostile group I mentioned decided to spoil the experiment. This species is ahead of us technologically but far behind the Council. Though they also inhabit a relatively nearby star, cosmologically speaking, their travel is slower, less elegant, and has to take place in stages. Think of it as space island hopping, which is why the lead time is so long. You probably want to know what they look like. Physically, based on the descriptions we saw, they are about 5 feet tall, segmented bodies, multiple limbs, basically ant-like in overall form. Nothing subtle or humanoid about them. They launched an expedition toward Earth with the stated goal of making a mess. Cause chaos here, damage the experiment, and embarrass the Council by showing they cannot protect their own projects due to internal disagreements. Basically exploiting internal fissures, turning small cracks of understanding in the Council into canyons, thus destroying it. That's their hope, at least. The transit time means for us they are expected to arrive in roughly 2 years from now. The 2027 holiday present no one asked for. That news triggered a major debate within the Council. One group said, the rules say non-interference. We watch and record what happens, even if it is ugly, as we had done in the past. The other group said, we effectively created this situation by tagging and monitoring this world. We have a moral obligation not to just watch a civilization we have been studying get smashed by somebody else's grudge. If the Council showed up in force, it would not be much of a fight. Their technology relative to the ant species is like a modern carrier group versus skilled archers on sailboats. The whole thing would be over quickly, and it would also completely blow the point of letting a young species find its own way. It would also be a tremendous blow to the human ego, which the Council is well aware of. So they arrived at a compromise. No direct Council fleets defending Earth, no obvious intervention. Instead, they would quietly arm us. What they chose to give us are things they roughly call scalar phase weapons. Our vocabulary is not great here. They are not just high-power lasers. They interact with fields we do not fully understand or really have names for yet. Shift phases dump huge amounts of energy from the vacuum into very specific volumes of space-time without a conventional bright beam or explosion. Compared to our current directed energy weapons, they are an enormous leap. As someone who spent years working with lasers and optic systems, I can tell you they sit so far off our current tech tree that if you saw the damage assessments from a pulse without context, you would think they were misprints. But compared to Council weapons, they are Nerf guns, training wheels per se. Anyway, that decision set off another big argument, both among them and among us. The obvious concern was simple. Once the external threat is gone, what stops us from turning these things on each other the same way we took nuclear power and turned it into thousands of warheads aimed at our own cities? On the US side, there were people saying exactly that, and some members of the Council argued that if we on Earth roll out scalar systems across arsenals, The first real test after the bugs are gone will likely be some crisis where two human governments start lighting each other up with technology we do not fully understand. The counter-argument, which won, was that species-level survival has to come first. If humanity gets wiped out by someone else's petty feud, then the entire debate is academic. Also, if humans fight this off themselves instead of watching the council show up and save the day, they will meet the wider community as people who actually did something, not as rescued primitives. Human ego intact, and kill switch if you will, has been built into the tech to disable it after the conflict, which the council sees us winning. If we then decide to use these weapons against each other, they'll simply be disabled until we humans have learned enough to disable the kill switch, which could be thousands of years from now for all I know. So against a lot of internal resistance, the Council has been quietly providing scalar phase systems to several blocks, not just the US. The list I saw included the United States, China, the European Union, through specific channels, Russia and Brazil. Those systems are being integrated into space platforms, aircraft, and undersea assets. Testing is happening in remote places and high altitudes, often disguised as other things. Most of the people physically working on it think it is an advanced homegrown black program. Only a very small circle in each capital sees the full context. I got to see pieces of that picture shortly before I was pushed into retirement, which is a polite way of saying I stopped being convenient. That is as specific as I am willing to get. There is one more reason I am writing this now after pondering it for a long time, and it is more personal than the 2-year clock. A friend of mine, someone I work closely with inside the program, another EO specialist, had been talking quietly years ago about going to Congress. Not with everything, they were not suicidal. Just enough to force a real closed-door hearing in the Senate, get the true nature of certain SAPs acknowledged on paper, make it harder to bury the whole subject under jokes and career threats. Over a year ago, I got word that they died. The official explanation has been vague and unsatisfying. Medical complications on a trip to a black site in the Indian Ocean. Those medical complications do not match what I know about their health. Then it became an accident at home, with no details anyone will put in writing. People who would normally be candid went very quiet very fast. Maybe it was just bad luck. People do die suddenly. But given the threats which are known about within certain IC sectors, when one is associated with this subject, I don't know for sure. What I do know is that the last long conversation I had with them was about whether it was worth trying to talk to certain congressional staffers for a certain senator. After hearing recent news confirming publicly much of what I know to be true privately, I stopped telling myself I would wait and see how things played out. Life is short, so here we are. Some stranger on the internet telling you an unbelievable story you are free not to believe. With roughly 2 years on the clock and the current rate of leaks and whistleblowers and half-disclosures, it is very unlikely they keep all of this under wraps until the first time something openly not from here appears in our sky or our orbit. At some point before that happens, at least one major government, maybe more, is going to go public in a controlled way. My guess would be China or the US, but it could be one of the others on that scalar weapon list. You will likely get a very carefully worded announcement about unidentified aerial phenomena, about contact with non-human intelligences, about new defensive technologies, and unprecedented international cooperation. It will be designed to manage panic and control the story. What you probably will not hear in the first round of briefings is the part about the Arids, the economic implications of their society's existence, the billion other habitable planets, the undersea infrastructure that has been here longer than we have had bones. You will not see anyone step up to a podium and say, oh, by the way, there is a branch of humanity that grew up without the idea of money and scarcity 10,000 years ago, and advanced 10,000 years ago, and advanced 5 millennia past us. That is why I am dumping this here, where people can ignore it, laugh at it, or save it and see how it ages. Like I said, do not have to believe me. I'm not here to sell a book, go on podcasts, be on TV, or do UFO lectures. Treat this as fiction if that makes you more comfortable. What I am really trying to do is get you to think past the kiddie pool questions. Are UFOs real? Are the NHI good or evil? Is not the interesting part. The far more interesting questions are what happens to this planet once everyone knows we are being watched, that we have cousins around another star, that some of the basic assumptions we build our societies around were just one option, not a fundamental law of nature. If in a year or two you start hearing officials talk about our cousins among the stars, or civilizations far older than ours, and new non-kinetic systems in shared planetary defense, remember this post and see how well it fits. Look, the bugs are coming either way. The Council is not going to save us directly. They already handed out the tools and they are watching to see what we do with them. The part that is still up to us is what kind of world we build if we get through it. Will we all go back to work and beat each other over the head with really advanced sticks? Or do we achieve a more enlightened potential? That is all I have. Ria.